Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Thank you. All right. So this morning, I'm really pleased to be here with a group of folks who have an extraordinary amount of expertise in elections and what it means and how to do it well. You are all very well aware that conducting elections is a fundamental responsibility of government, and to do that in a way that is fair and transparent, and one in which it leads to accurate results. And it is that way that we bring people into this process to lead and set policy and budget and innovation and reform. And so it is a critically important structure in our democracy. It is also our hope that elections are carried out in a way that is efficient and cost effective. And in 2020, we had the added layer of conducting that election in a way that was safe for participants and poll workers and really everyone involved. And so we're going to talk about all those things this morning. I'm very pleased to present the panel. Everyone is appearing remotely today, so I'm just going to call out folks and ask you to do a quick introduction for yourself. First, my co-facilitator this morning, Jennifer Schultz.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Schultz, and I'm the Enterprise Risk Manager with the Office of Management and Budget.
Thank you. And now our panel representative is Julie.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Hanson. I'm the Property and Customer Service Manager here for Scott County. And one of the areas I manage is elections.
Chris.
Good morning. I'm Chris Loggy. I'm an operations analyst in the Community Services Division, and I help pretty extensively with elections.
Lisa.
Good morning, Lisa Koner, Public Affairs Coordinator, and I think my title pretty much explains it all.
Thank you. Cindy.
I'm Cindy Geis. I am the Community Services Director, and I'm also the appointed County Auditor.
Deanne.
I'm Deanne Croat. I'm the clerk in Helena Township.
Welcome. Good morning. Anne.
Yeah, hi. I'm Anne Orlovsky, and I'm the city clerk with Prior Lake.
Thank you very much for being here today, Anne. David.
Yeah, good morning. My name is David Maeda. I'm the Director of Elections for the Minnesota Secretary of State.
Thank you too for being our guest this morning. We appreciate your participation. All right, so with that, I think we'll get started. And I want to go right to start with a look at the data. And so looking at page 12 for the folks that have paper copies at home, I wonder if I could just ask just a general question about what we might understand about the incredibly high turnout of voters in Minnesota broadly and in Scott County specifically. What do we know about that?
So I can take that call. And actually, since Julie has come on board probably around the 2016 era, so she actually has conducted about the last 3 elections. But prior to that, as you can see, as we go back through the course of time, particularly through those even years, we have had a remarkably high voter turnout. And it's not unlike what the state of Minnesota has. The state of Minnesota is one of the highest voter turnouts in the country, and I think we have heard that time and time again. What do we account that for? I would say that the majority of the reason that we think we have a very high voter turnout is because there are so many different nonprofit organizations, government organizations, and just people who representing different parties who are going out and really encouraging voters to voice their opinion on who they want to lead both our state and our country. So with that, has always been a very, very high interest in people being able to express that civil right that they have to go out and vote. And I think the more effort we continue to put into that outreach, the higher those numbers are going to continue to climb. The second component of it is I do think that over these last probably 30 years, there has been some really aggressive influences in particularly our federal government, as well as in our state. And people, they get jazzed about being able to get out there and elect people who they feel will do a really good job leading both our state and our country, and all of our local governments, our cities, our counties, our townships, and our schools. So in my mind, it really deals a lot with, or the impact to this is really the outreach that we have to really try to get people to get out and vote.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Can I ask you, as you were looking at these numbers, and I think the figure in the narrative said that there were almost 96,000 registered voters in Scott County. As you were looking at this, knowing that it was going to be high voter turnout, how did you start planning for the 2020 election? Like there were such unique challenges last year to doing this well. Can you talk about that?
I'd like to take that if I could. 2020 was unique in so many ways, not just with COVID and the safety aspect and all of the extra things we had to do with that. We had our first presidential nomination primary in 2020 since the 80s. So that I have to look back and, when you put your historical goggles on, we really thought going into 2020, that was going to be our big challenge. And the PNP just kind of sailed right through. It was new, it was different, but we just didn't know what we didn't know, as far as turnout in that. As we got closer to the general, and we knew that many voters would be taking advantage of different ways to vote, keeping people out of polling places, and social distancing, all of those kinds of things for planning were so important. We really planned for over 100%. Everything we ordered for supplies, for ballots, for everything that we did, we knew we had to exceed what we are going to need. You never want to get caught flat-footed and not have the supplies that you need, especially in elections. So we really I planned for absentee for 100% turnout, knowing that it really wasn't going to come to that, but always you have to be prepared. This is an area that you can't fly by the seat of your pants. Pivot was definitely a word in 2020 that I think we used a lot. We had to pivot and change and do things differently than maybe we had before, all within, of course, the confines of the rules and regulations set in regards to elections. So definitely an extensive amount of planning.
Thanks, Julie. We're going to talk more about that planning here in a minute. Jen, did you have questions on this slide?
I did. I just, first of all, I just want to say in reading through this material, I just think this panel did a really nice job of putting this together. I actually found it pretty fascinating. And I think partly just because, Julie, I think you spoke to it, but what an interesting year, right? It's a presidential election. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so there's all these safety concerns. We know voter turnout's probably going to be high. And then on page, and you're right up on page 3 and 4, you certainly talk a little bit about some of the misinformation surrounding elections, as well as some of the attention I think that we all felt in 2020 for a variety of reasons, right? And not only because of the pandemic, just because of the nature of the election. So I just, again, for anybody on the panel, I would just really appreciate if anybody would talk a little bit about how did that impact staff and putting this together. And again, I think you guys just did a really phenomenal job of navigating and getting through this, but just again, and the pardoning, obviously this isn't just a county function, right? I mean, it's the counties, it's the cities, it's the township, it's a state. It's really an example of collaboration. And so again, if anybody in the panel would just kind of talk about it, just kind of fascinates me, and to think about kind of how did your teams work through that, and what did you learn from that, and how does that help kind of moving forward in future elections. So kind of a lot, sorry, but just kind of in general, it's kind of what I was thinking about as I read through this, just lots of questions around kind of how the team worked through this, as well as, again, what does this mean for future planning and impacts?
Jen, I would like to first have our city representative and our township representative talk a little bit about what they did, and then I think Julie can pick it up from the end and maybe have David kind of provide a little bit of information from what they heard in their town hall meetings with all the counties. But with that, Deanne or Anne, would you be willing to talk a little bit about what your anticipation, your planning phases that you went in from a township and a city perspective?
Sure. This is Deanne. I think most of our planning followed township or the Scott County guidelines. When it was time to think about election judges, we've had a solid base of election judges. Not all townships have. But when the county started promoting the need for election judges, I got 4 new election judges in my district directly from that call out, and they were super. At that point, a lot of the election judges came forth very much concerned about whether our elections were fair, and if there was opportunities for us to skew anything, and they became believers real fast in what a solid system we have. So that was one of my key preparations, was making sure I had enough election judges. And I did lose some for fears of COVID. And so the new ones really came in handy. So that aspect was really important to our township.
Hi, I'm Ann Orlovsky with Prior Lake, and I can speak on behalf of what we did as a city. I have to echo what Deanne said. We, also had fears with not having enough election judges for this process. I also had 50% of our judges were brand new, brought on because we've lost so many, and a lot of our head judges had backed out for fear of COVID as well. So we really had to pivot and train people fast and bring them on board. I think that the county's help in being prepared for all of that and walking the cities through some of those processes and getting us the extra help we needed to find judges was instrumental in making that successful. But it was a challenging year. Also with absentee voting, Prior Lake was one of the cities that took on absentee voting at our city. And I know going forward that we'll have to increase the amount of judges that we had. I think that I had a little bit of burnout because I maybe didn't have enough people staffed for the amount of people we had coming in. It was well received here in Prior Lake, and the residents really were happy that they didn't have to drive all the way to Shakopee to the courthouse to be able to drop off their absentee ballot. But to prepare for that going forward, we'll have to beef up our staff and election judges for that. But yeah, anything else, just let me know.
If I could say one more thing, I think that the training that Scott County provided, online training, when they first mentioned that they would be doing that, I wasn't sure how our election judges would receive that, and it went over so well. That was a perfect idea, and it was a way that we could work through training with COVID concerns. So that was great.
Speaking after both of you, I have to say thank you to you and to all of the other clerks. One of the things I am most proud of in my role, in this role in particular, I've been with Scott County since 1999. It's been a long time. I've grown up here. One of the things I'm most proud of is the relationships we've built. The relationships with you guys, with all of the clerks, with your admin people, with the state, with David's office, with Secretary Simon, I'm just exceptionally proud of that. We don't do things necessarily the way that every other county does. Anne has worked with Hennepin before, and it's different, and that's okay. But those relationships give us the opportunity for education. Both I get to learn from Anne and Deanne. I came into this position knowing very little about elections. I've learned so much from them. Our relationships with the Office of the Secretary of State, especially during 2020. Maybe David will touch on that as well, but there were opportunities for us to participate in working groups. Chris and I both did. Different things, communication, dealing with COVID and how the polling place should look like. We don't hire election judges. The townships and the cities hire their own, but we did do extra outreach and education, as well as the state did this year, to try and find more election judges, more people who are willing to learn. And there are things that came out of 2020 that have been invaluable lessons that we'll never forget. The online training is one example of that. It was something that was on my to-do list to do and rapidly had to get done. And overall, it went really, really well. We were able to offer one in-person training class for brand new judges on equipment. Learning how to use a poll pad and a tabulator virtually is definitely a big challenge. So hybrid, I think, is going to be our focus in the future for those returning judges who need to recertify but have done this before. We always try and tailor our focus on the things that we learned from the last election. So we'll be able to do that again, and hopefully we'll get through all of this and be able to offer some in-person training as well. But hopefully David's got a couple of things to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to repeat a lot of what's been said, but to Julie's point, coming into 2020, our focus was on really two different things. The March presidential primary, which is a brand new third statewide election that none of us had administered before. And then our office was really focused on cybersecurity. In fact, I was able to hire a person just devoted to working with counties on any vulnerabilities any of our systems might have against cyber attacks. So those are the two things going into 2020 we were really laser focused on. And then the pandemic hit, and to Julie's point, the word pivot became part of our vocabulary. And in visiting with counties since November, and I think I've met with myself and Secretary Simon have met with over half the counties in the state already. It's amazing how people adapted. And I think that's really the message from 2020 is things like figuring out ways to recruit election judges, like Deanne mentioned. One of the things to fight disinformation and misinformation is invite people that are skeptical of our systems to serve as election judges so they can see all the things that we have in place to make sure our elections are secure and fair. And I think just little things like that people adapted to in 2020 were remarkable. The turnout question, we did lead the nation in voter turnout for the third straight time in 2016, 2018, and 2020. We were number one in the nation in voter turnout. We had over 3.2 million voters who voted in our state in 2020, 1.9 voted by absentee, which was a huge shift in the game. I don't think we'll hit that again. I think that was really pandemic related. But again, 2020 was a remarkably different year for elections. And my takeaway in meeting with the counties, Julie and Cindy and Ann and Deanne, we have so many great election administrators across the state, and that should give everybody confidence in our system.
I want to add one thing to what Julie was saying, because she made a comment saying we don't hire election judges, but we did hire election judges this last year. And we heard David talk about it a little bit, about hiring those people that may be a little skeptical. And I had the honor to actually work pretty closely with some of those temporary. I will call myself a gopher in elections. I usually look to Julie, who administers the elections, to tell me, how can I help you, without me getting in her way and interrupting all of the planning that she and Chris had done throughout getting ready for this year that was going to be unlike many other that we've ever faced. However, I did work, she hired a bunch, 25 temporaries, and I didn't get to work with all of them, but I got to work with the ones that actually handled the absentee returns. And what I learned from those people who came in wanting to know, these ballots come in via the mail, and we don't know what happens to them. We have no idea who's manipulating them, if they're held in a secure fashion, if they're processed in a secure fashion. And to Ann's comment, to David's comment, to Deanne's comment, they had their eyes opened and they became believers, which was great because they could advocate for the process, saying, yeah, we have 2 people working with these ballots. So they're opening a singular ballot. They're both looking at it. They're both not looking at who they voted for. Excuse me. Yeah, when they open the ballots, but they're looking at, is it going to be able to be processed? Is there going to be extraneous marks? And even upon the acceptance of those ballots, they haven't opened them yet, but they're just looking at who returned it. Does all the information align? If not, can we find a signature? Is there something that we can do to reach out to this voter? Most of the time it was sending them a new ballot saying, you used the wrong number, you did this electronically, we don't have a signature to validate, we have to reject your ballot. By the way, you used your driver's license in one form of ID and now you're using your social. We don't have that on record. We can't validate you. Your signature was electronic or it wasn't there because you electronically filed. So these folks sat there and they're like, it's excruciating the amount of time it takes to process those absentees. So I was honored to work with them. And it was at least an eye opener for most of those folks to say it's extremely secure. These ballots are stored, they're processed by 2 different people, and there's a lot of scrutiny put on whether or not they should be accepted or rejected. So it was great to have those people there. So thanks to Julie and her team for training them well and making sure they do it properly.
Well, thank you. Thanks for walking through kind of the planning and the anticipation of the high voter turnout. Let's talk a little bit about what some of your data shows. And what I'd like to do is kind of walk through it by like looking at the registration data, some of the precinct data, and then the post-election pieces, if that's all right. So we're going to go over to page 19. Oops. So the voter registration accuracy. I'm wondering if someone can just talk through the key pieces, particularly about the returned ballots, like tell us about the data, but also explain what's the process for that return. And I think it sort of builds on what Cindy was just speaking to.
Chris, this is voter registration. So these returns these are PVC cards, which are just validating the registration, not really the ballots.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
But to talk about this voter registration accuracy, the process for registering to vote, of course, is, as you probably all know, on the front end, you fill out a voter registration application of some kind. Either you fill it out in person, you go to the Secretary of State's website, you complete that. You may change your address or renew your driver's license, and you're given the opportunity to register to vote that way. So multiple different reasons. And as Cindy talked about, there's a lot of outreach with nonprofit groups, those kinds of things that do send out information about registering to vote. So however we receive that information, whether it's through one of those methods or you've changed your address and we get your data through the National Change of Address Registry, however it is that it gets here, we put eyes on all of those. So this comes into a queue. We look at the information that's provided. We look to see if there's already existing record to be able to update. If there's not, to create a new record. And once those leave our hands, they go through the Secretary of State's data verifications and things that have been set up through Driver and Vehicle Services, the Social Security Administration, those kinds of things. There are times that people register to vote and they maybe changed their address before they moved. You can't get your driver's license in the mail before you move, but sometimes people try. So some of those different things, we do get these PVCs, these postal verification cards, sent back to us. And at that point, we do some research about why we got it returned back. So as you can see from some of this data, the percentage returned in 2020 was 0.6%. It is very low. It is usually an addressing problem. Maybe someone, when they filled out their voter registration application, didn't list their address correctly. There are multiple reasons, but it is a very low percentage of information that we get back that truly isn't correct.
So Julie, does this speak to, or to anyone on the panel, you know, there are concerns about people who are voting, who live in other districts, or people who are voting in the wrong precincts, or maybe they're dead and voting, or, you know, all those things. Like, is this the system that helps make sure that only that the right people are voting here in Scott County?
It is a piece of the system. The statewide voter registration system is very layered. We get data verifications from, like I said, the NCOA, the National Change of Address List. We get them from Driver and Vehicle Services. We get them from all different kinds of places, as well as the Minnesota Department of Health. So we do receive, it sounds morbid, of course, but death lists of folks who have passed away, and we are able to update those data. So if a death is filed in the state of Minnesota, it is merged with their voter record. And again, eyes are put on all of those. If they are a Minnesota resident and they pass away in another state, we either receive a paper list. We do get all kinds of information. Those lists go to the Secretary of State's office, to David's office. I'm sure they receive millions of pieces of paper, and then they're all filtered out through the local counties. So we get packets from the Secretary of State every week, every Monday, of both lists of folks who have passed away from other states, people who have moved, those kinds of things. So it is a small piece, but it is definitely one of the layers, yes.
One thing, if I could add, is we do belong to a consortium of states called ERIC. It's the Electronic Registration Information Center, where we share voter data with other states. We are now one of 32 states that belong to this organization. And in 2020, it was huge because Florida joined the consortium. And of course, we know a lot of our seniors moved to Florida either just for the winter or permanently moved. So we're now getting better voter data from the state of Florida. California also joined ERIC in 2020. We're hoping to get to all 50 states, but we do share voter data across states through this consortium that gets pushed down to the counties.
Great, thanks. You referenced the ERIC system, David. So the slide that's up, this is new data for us. I think it's the first time that this has been presented at Scott Delivers. Are there pieces of this that reflect efficiencies that any of you want to highlight in using this system?
I think one of the biggest things in this is look at the blue. The blue bar is existing voter electronic update. So in those cases, we love it when the voters take initiative themselves to update their records. And we, in our outreach data, we ask them, make sure that you look at your record, make sure it's correct. So if you're wondering, am I registered? Is there something that is gonna miss? They have the ability to do that, and they have the ability to update it automatically themselves. And like Julie alluded to, we have other ways to get that electronic data, but the best way that we could absolutely ensure that the data is correct is for the voters to take a look at it themselves and update it electronically. The other thing that I will state, and it gets to be problematic, is when we get paper applications, there's multiple things there that has caused us to reject them, or maybe they're done incorrectly. And by incorrectly, I mean the data was entered incorrectly because you can't read the handwriting. And it's been an ongoing issue quite a bit of the time when we receive these paper applications where people don't write clearly. Instead of putting their birth date, they put today's date in their birth date field or something to that effect that causes us to either reject, or if we can't read it legibly, we may put their name in incorrectly if we can't find them by a driver's license number in the last for their social or some other manner, checking address records. It's difficult. So this data is really important in that between the blue and the purple, it helps us ensure the records are more accurate because we don't have to try to decipher handwriting. But to David's point, we did a very large outreach early on, really telling people, be prepared for this election. We really were trying to minimize the amount of time that they were standing in the poll next to other people. So get in there, make sure your registration's up to date before election day. It's just going to help the process all the way through. Whether you vote by absentee or whether you vote in person, we want to make sure that the voter owns their own destiny and is well prepared. So this, I think, goes to some of that effort that we talked about with Julie and her team and the Secretary of State's office in really trying to get information overload to these voters. And maybe Lisa Kohner, who got kind of poked all the time by, we need you to, can you? She can talk about her efforts in trying to do some of that outreach that we feel kind of helped this along, as well as just voter turnout.
Oh, good morning, Cindy. I don't know if you meant to hand that off to me, but I'll take that baton in the relay.
I did.
Okay. Yeah, Cindy's absolutely right. I mean, basically what we had to do is use every medium at our disposal repeatedly. And when I say repeatedly, I mean iteratively on the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and the truth every single day. Constantly trying to monitor for misinformation, disinformation, or just a lack of understanding for the most part. And so we ramped up when we had to ramp up, intervened when we had to intervene, corrected and nudged when we had to correct and nudge. But we used paper, we used the mass media, we used social media, we used our website, we used everything we had at our disposal, knowing that we didn't have a treasure trove of resources to draw on other than the ones that we already had. So we were just putting out information as quickly as possible and correcting misinformation as quickly as possible. And it was, and as everybody has noted before, it was an interesting confluence of events that was happening, not only with changes in the election, the temperature of the election, COVID, and everything like that. So people were edgy. So we had to be constantly monitoring what was going on out there in the Twitterverse and in the social media universe as well. But we did what we could with what we had. And I think we did a fairly good job of it.
Thanks, Lisa. Jen, did you have questions about the voter registration piece, or should we move on?
No, I just, I appreciate the conversation around it, because when I looked at this, I mean, my initial question was kind of like, okay, there's a lot going on here. What does this really mean? So the explanation was really appreciated. And I guess in my mind was just thinking that obviously, again, that seems that that's another one of those lessons learned, and would suspect some of that kind of outreach will continue moving forward to get people more on that electronic piece, Cindy, that you talked about, which makes it a little bit easier on your part. So
thanks. All right, let's talk about the precinct reports. And that's on page 18 for folks that have paper copies. Would somebody talk us through that? This is a data set that allows us to make sure we're accounting for all the ballots, I believe. I wonder if somebody can talk through the specifics of this data.
I'd be happy to. Precinct reports, literally when we're talking about precinct reports, we are talking about when you have placed your ballot into the tabulator at the end of the night, as Ann and Deanne know very, very well, and better than I do, of course, even, that you run your report off of your tabulator, and you make certain that the amount of ballots that you have taken in versus the amount of signatures that you have, people that have checked in, are the same. Is it possible that you could have more signatures than you have ballots? It's absolutely possible. Someone could have come in and checked in and changed their mind. But you would never have more ballots than you would signatures. You can't obviously check in 960 people and end up with 961 ballots in the tabulator. That's not okay. So these are us physically taking those tapes that the townships and cities have brought to us and looking at those and making sure that the amount of people or signatures that they've checked in matches the amount of ballots. Like I said, can be off one way, can't be off the other. If it does happen, there are absolutely procedures in place on how to correct that. Is it happened that someone hasn't been checked in? Of course. But like I said, there are procedures in place set by the state that need to be followed to do that. We, in fact, have had people that have had to come in and rerun their ballots because they didn't balance. So, but 91.9, I'm sorry, 91.5, bad eyes, is the percentage that we were at for the 2020 election.
Just to add to that, in some of the other precinct balancing, it's not just the signatures match with the ballots, and because almost all those cases do. There's a rare occasion where it doesn't, and it doesn't happen every year or every election. If you have it in maybe one precinct once every 2 or 3 times these large elections, that's probably where you sit. The other reasons why you may not balance is you're given, if a township or a city is given 500 ballots, we need to make sure you have 500 ballots left. And sometimes it's just they're filling in the tapes wrong. So they forget their spoiled ballots, or they added wrong, or something to that effect, where we're looking at totals and they actually balanced, but their tapes were wrong. So we call that an imbalance because we need to correct it. We need to look at all of their documents that they sent back. We need to look at what they have for rejected, spoiled ballots. And sometimes it's just a matter of changing the data on their tapes to make it accurate. The only time that we will get that we will call these townships back in or the cities back in is when we know that there's an extra ballot in that polling in that tabulator. One of the main reasons why I think that could happen is someone walking in and having an absentee ballot and putting it in the tabulator. We try to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have a tabulator judge, but if a tabulator judge for some reason is turned and trying to help a customer and someone walks in and puts that in, we all know that precincts can get busy, but if they put their ballot in that they've gotten through the mail, then they have to fix it. But again, those don't happen very often. I think in the 2020 election and the amount of turnout, we had, I want to say, one precinct or one city that had to rerun their ballots, maybe 2, but it wasn't in every precinct. It's just the one that might have been over. You have to pull blindly, spoil it, and rerun. That way you're not looking at who they're voting for. You just kind of pull, multiple judges watch the process to make sure it happens correctly. But the precinct summary report really is a compilation of how many ballots did you get, how many you're returning, and what is how many signatures and how many ballots do you have. So there are multiple factors that go into the things that they all have to fill out. And a lot of times it's mathematical, or it's just an error in entering the data.
Is there a performance target for this?
Performance target is 100%.
Oh, okay.
That was my question as well, Chris. And I also was wondering, do you guys do any comparison about kind of how Scott County is doing against other jurisdictions in terms of this measure? Or is this, again, is it just to try to get as close to 100% as you can?
There's two things. I'm going to let David answer one of that because he's going to know really maybe these statistics statewide. But the reason that that we have gone up is extensive training. Some of the judges just don't know how to fill out those precinct summary sheets, those things that come off the tabulator. They're putting all the wrong numbers in there. And it's like, ugh. So we continue to push for training because that's 99.9% of why these may come in wrong. David, do you have maybe a better understanding statewide with some of these precinct reports that come back and some of the challenges that other counties have on trying to really do a training that seems to get people where they need to be in order to fill them out correctly?
I don't have, Cindy, I don't have statistical statewide data like this. It'd be interesting to try to collect that. I can anecdotally say from my time as a Minnetonka city clerk, these numbers correlate with what I saw in Minnetonka. In fact, to everything you mentioned about the reason the numbers might be off is absolutely 100% what I saw in Minnetonka. In fact, the check-in, I actually utilized 2 finance staff because they were really good at reconciling things. But everything you mentioned is absolutely the things I've seen during my career.
All right, thank you. Let's talk about absentee voting, and that's been there's lots of mixed thinking about absentee voting, and people have lots to say about it. So let's look at your data and what that says. Can somebody talk us through the absentee voting piece, and certainly recognizing the volume was a significant issue in this last election?
I'd be happy to. Absentee voting, if you're not aware, runs 46 days before every election, no matter what type of election you have. And there are differences for some small township elections. They have a different period. But for all of our elections, it is 46 days. Absentee voting can occur either in person through an absentee voting center. It can occur by mail. And then our last function kind of for absentee voting for the last few days is something called direct balloting, where it's still part of the absentee process, but you come in and you fill out your application, and then you are able to complete your ballot and put it right into the tabulator versus folding it into multiple envelopes kind of thing. So what this chart shows us is, of course, not only volume of absentee, but comparatively, how many ballots are accepted, how many are rejected, and then how many that we get are not returned, lost, or canceled. So if you look at the 2020 data, the ballots issued out of Scott County were 51,669, and that comprises all of the voting methods, whether someone would have gone to the city of Prior Lake and voted in person, if they would have come to our absentee office, or if they would have voted by mail. Out of those 51,000, we accepted 46,000 plus ballots. And what that means by accepted is, like Cindy was talking about before, the folks that sit in pairs and review the ballot envelope, not the ballot itself, but the ballot envelope, to ensure that the information that the voter completed on the envelope was correct and matched what we have on record. If for some reason, Cindy talked a little bit about the process before, if for some reason we can't match their driver's license number or the last 4 of their social, we look to their signature. Of course, if they applied online, we don't have their signature on file. So we do what we do based on state standards as to what we can accept and reject. If we have to reject, we do send a new ballot. As we get closer to election day, and we know that during the 2020 election, the time to receive a ballot by mail was often long, and maybe folks weren't going to have the opportunity to vote it and get it back to us in time, we were making phone calls and we were calling voters and saying, you know what, when you applied for your absentee ballot, you used your full driver's license number, but on your envelope, you put the last four of your social, or, you know, something to that effect. We would tell them, you know, you either need to go and vote at an absentee center in person or go vote on election day. So out of the 51,000, we only had 397 that were rejected. If you look at the not returned, lost, and canceled, there are absolutely ballots that go out that people choose not to vote. For some reason, they receive the ballot. Maybe they don't receive the ballot. That would be the lost category. They choose not to vote, no different than in a polling place. We also had a very high rate of canceled ballots this year, which was different for us. We had a lot of people who requested a ballot by mail, who then changed their mind and went into an in-person vote center. So for example, we do manage all of the mail absentee voting here at Scott County, no matter where you live. If you apply for an absentee ballot and you want it to be mailed, we handle that in-house. We don't ask the cities to do that. But once the ballot was mailed, they may change their mind and say, you know what, I want to go to see Ann at the City of Prior Lake and I want to vote in person instead. So they may go to City of Prior Lake, Ann and her team look up that voter and they would see that an absentee ballot had already been issued. That would need to be canceled. And then they would be issued a new ballot on the spot. So we did see a high rate of that with COVID, people changing their mind, maybe with not being able to receive that as quickly as they would have liked. So that's kind of this data in a nutshell.
So Julie, on the ones that you classify as lost, is that because people have reported them that they never showed up, or how does it get that designation? And then what happens? I mean, is there something then in the system that's entered based on that ballot number, or something that somebody can't then duplicate it, for example? Or can you just talk through that lost process a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent question. They are self-reported by the voter. They will call and they say, you never sent me my ballot, or I never received my ballot. We would access the statewide voter registration system and say, oh, it looks like we sent out your ballot 12 days ago. You should have had it by now. Verify their information. And then we would cancel that ballot in the system. Each ballot or ballot envelope is designated a absentee ballot ID. So we have the ability to then cancel that record, mark it lost, and give them the choice about how then they would like to vote. Do you want us to resend you a ballot? Would you rather go in person? Would you rather go on election day? That type of thing. But yes, absolutely. It's self-reported and we're able to cancel that in the system.
So then if that ballot, for example, surfaced somewhere else in Carver County or in, I don't know, wherever else, and again, maybe that's not even possible, but so is that, you know, if it surfaced somewhere else and someone tries to use that, then the system's able to identify that? And again, maybe that's more of a state question for David. I don't know. I'm just trying to, you know, just again, hearing all the stuff that we've heard about ballots and elections, just trying to understand that process.
Chris,
Yeah.
do you want to, or David, you can take it too, but Chris actually handled all of our return envelopes. So I'd like her to respond a little bit to some of the challenges she had on receiving them after the ballot board. But go ahead, David, talk about it a little from the state side first.
So to answer your specific example, yes, because all 87 counties are using the same statewide voter registration database. Each ballot gets uniquely a barcode that's unique to that ballot packet. And so if somebody in Carver County were to receive a Scott County ballot, it's trackable statewide.
Thank you.
Chris, did you want to? Oh,
Sure.
go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just going to say the same thing that David did. If someone after the fact that had called us, say they actually received that first ballot that we had sent them and they voted it and sent it back to us, when we receive it, we would see that that had been marked as lost. And so it's not able to be accepted in the system. They would need to vote that replacement ballot that they were sent. So we did as far as the rejected ballots go, we try to be very thorough when we reject a ballot and let the people know exactly why it was rejected. Even sometimes we will send maybe a photocopy of their envelope that they sent indicating, because if you send somebody a rejection letter and say you didn't write your driver's license number right, or you didn't give us the correct last four of your social, they're like, what are you talking about? Of course I did. It's my number. I know what it is. And so sometimes if you can send them a photocopy of that to show them, well, you mix these two numbers up, then they'll be like, oh, okay, yep, I get it. And they can revote that ballot. So we do have a lot of, when we reject them, sometimes people will call us and question us on it. And so we have files of everything that's been rejected along with the letter that was sent to the voter so that we can refer to that and let them know exactly what the situation was. And so after the fact, then they'll say, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying. We did have a couple times where there was an issue maybe with the post office where we would send a ballot to an address that was requested and it would come back to us. So we would indicate or contact that voter and say, it's being returned by the post office. Do we not have your correct address? And they'd say, no, that is the correct address. Send it again. And so sometimes the voter actually, I know at least one time the voter actually had to contact the post office and question why they're not delivering, because she said, I live at this address. Why won't you deliver this to me? So all in all, I think we had a low percentage of ballots being rejected. And like I said, we try to give the voters the best information that we can as to why they are being rejected and help them by sending them, of course, a replacement ballot, help them to still be able to cast their vote.
And the one last thing that I want to kind of add, and I mean, it's not funny, but sometimes it is when a voter goes to the, let's just say that they go to in person absentee and they want to vote at one of the cities, and the city or told that will tell them, you already voted. The county seems to already have a ballot on record that was accepted. And so, Chris, can you talk about a little bit about that process, about when a voter goes to the poll and they're being told that they already voted, and they generally, again, they're going to claim fraud, and what you generally do, because they generally will come to the county to kind of give you an earful.
Sure. If that situation happens, they will either call us or come to the county and ask, saying that they didn't vote the ballot that was sent to them, or they never received the ballot. So what we are able to do is find that ballot that we have received and bring out the outer envelope and show that to them and say, this is the ballot that we received. It's got all the identifying characteristics on it. The signature is matched possibly to the application. And so kind of just talk them through it. A lot of times maybe they forget that they sent the ballot back or whatever the situation is, but I don't remember that we had people that where they said that they didn't vote and they were adamant that they didn't vote after they stopped by to talk to us.
Most of those cases, it is just oh my gosh, I totally forgot. That was such a long time ago. Julie said it's 46 days before. A lot of people vote right away. Well, then when it gets time, and with Lisa, and us prompting her to continue to get out there and tell people, get out and vote, it's coming up, and election day is this day. Of course, they run and they go out to vote, and they're like, 46 days ago, was that even the right election? Or the other thing that happens, like with Chris, is when we talk about uniqueness of ballots and uniqueness of numbers on return envelopes, the amount of people that may return their primary ballot during a general election. They asked for the primary, they never returned it, and they marked both that they wanted both elections mailed to them. So Chris and her team will send out a ballot for the general election, and then they inadvertently send back the primary, and they never send back the general. So those are also issues that this Chris and her team and Julie and all of her judges have to face all the time.
All right, let's talk about post-election reviews. And I'm wondering if somebody could, and I think David, you do some work on the post-election audit at the state level. Maybe somebody locally could talk about this data, or David, maybe you can.
Sure, I can start, and people want to join in, that's fine. So we do have a law that requires post-election auditing in our state, and I was actually pretty instrumental in writing this law when I was the Hennepin County election supervisor back in the early 2000s. But basically what it is, there are two pieces. Each county has to randomly select precincts to be hand recounted. In 2020, the races that were recounted were the presidential race, the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. representative races that were on all the ballots. So random precincts are selected in every county. The county then hand recounts it and verifies it against the official results that were printed out on election night. If it deviates by more than 0.5%, then more precincts are chosen to have hand recounts. That has never happened since this law has been in place in the mid-2000s statewide. Our voting equipment is incredibly accurate. The second part of the audit involves our office. We then, from this pool of randomly selected precincts across the state, we then randomly select a subset of them, and we do a further audit. One of the things I changed, I started in this position in 2019, participated in the post-election audit that our office does, and didn't find it real useful because we're basically go out to the county and then count sheet paper to verify that numbers match up. And there's value in doing that in an audit. But what we did, in Julie and Cindy can certainly talk about this, we really changed it up in 2021 to make it a more comprehensive review of documents. And we really had conversations during these with the election administrators across the state to understand how training is done, what types of forms are being used. And it's not to catch people doing things wrong. It's to if we see common mistakes being made across the state in multiple counties, that's on us, that we have to do a better job training in those areas. But what the 2021 post-election audit really showed is the remarkable efforts that people made to adapt to the administering an election during a pandemic, and that everything that has been discussed on this call, the accuracy of the absentee voting, the voter registration check, everything worked remarkably well in 2020. And I just can't commend Cindy, the election administrators on this call. I can't commend you enough, because I know that was not easy to accomplish during a pandemic. But those are my comments.
Thank you. So can I ask, as we look at the absentee voter data, we look at the accuracy of post-election review, is there anything in this data that you see that you hold worries about, given the adaptations we made for COVID? I mean, we set up some drop boxes, we extended some timelines for absentee voting. Is that correct? There was a longer period of time for absentee voting, that we made some modifications along the way. As you look at your data, this question goes to anybody on the panel. As you look at the data, is there anything that indicates to you that those adaptations negatively impacted accuracy?
I would like to say, I don't believe so. One of the things, and you mentioned, Chris, that we did, and I didn't refer back to it earlier, and I wanted to come back to that, so thanks for the segue, is we were a county that we did things a little bit differently than a lot of others, and David would know this better than I do, but we set up drop sites. So one of the things that we did due to COVID was give voters the option to return their ballot to another location that wasn't us, and we did that using staff. So some of those 25 people that Cindy alluded to were trained as election judges and trained on how to accept an absentee ballot and review the data. So part of the reason I do believe that our rejection rate was so low was that if someone requested a mail absentee ballot, they filled it out at home, but then they made the choice to not send it back due to timeline, which, like you referred to, absentee itself wasn't extended, but we had an additional 7 days to accept ballots that were postmarked by election day. But we gave people the option to go to a staff location and return the ballot. Those people were trained on what needed to be on that envelope what needed to be in the SVRS system so that they could compare and make sure that was accurate, and we could catch those problems there. So it could just be what we have on record is your driver's license number. You fill out your social. Could you add your driver's license number for us? So that when they placed it in the locked ballot box, we already knew that that was in a state that it could be accepted. So that was something we really did differently. And you know, once you put something out there, it's real hard to pull it back. So we plan to continue that in the future. We had great success with that. There was some new legislation this year on drop boxes and how you needed to manage a drop box, on the fact that they needed to be recorded, those kinds of things. And by doing manned drop sites, we are giving an extra layer of security and hopefully making folks feel secure. My sister lives in a different county that I shall not name, and she called me on one of the days before the election and said, I'm standing in line to return my ballot. My county told me I could bring my ballot in person, and she was standing in the same line that folks were there to actually absentee vote. She waited in line for an hour and a half just to return a ballot, versus we had staffed drop sites that our city halls and libraries were kind enough to host. So we really made great strides in that process last year, and it only improved our accuracy.
I can speak to that too. I would agree. Being a host city of one of those locations, it worked really well. And it was nice to have it separate from the actual in-person absentee voting. And I hope that you continue to do that as the county because it did work well. And I know our residents really appreciated being able to drop off and hand deliver their ballot and verify that everything was correct and accurate before they hand it over to be counted. So I have to echo what Julie said. I think that it helped.
And did our voters, were they confused at all when they walked in and there was like a one way or the other way, or how did you signage that so that they didn't end up in the wrong line?
Yep, sure. Prior Lake, we had signs created to direct people. And we also have someone at our front desk who, when people walk right by those signs, was still able to guide them in which location. But we had signs with arrows, you know, you head this way for absentee voting, head to the left for your Scott County drop off of your mail-in ballot. And I think that worked well, and hope we can continue to do that.
Thank you. We have just a couple minutes left. I had two questions. Jen, did you have any final questions that you wanted to pose before we return the microphones to the commissioners?
I just wanted to, I noticed in the packet, you guys included your ops plan, your operational services plan. And I just wanted to, being a part of the strategy team, that was kind of my life last year, is reviewing and looking at those ops plans. And I know we spent a significant amount of time, and I just wanted someone to kind of speak to that, and maybe even just speak a little bit to what worked with that, maybe what didn't, you know, just in general. And again, and maybe just speak to why it was included in the packet. I mean, certainly I know that the pandemic had a huge impact on the elections, but again, just was curious about that.
I would like to speak to that if I could jump in. I have to give a huge amount of kudos to Cindy. She spent a great amount of time detailing out this operations plan. And when we deal a lot, not only relationships with the local and the state, but we have great relationships with other counties through MACO, the Minnesota Association of County Officers, and through other things. And the woman, the auditor treasurer in another county, reached out and said, does anyone have a solid plan for how to set up, administer an election in this? We've had requests. We don't necessarily have something to share. And Cindy shared our operational service plan with them that then it went out statewide. So it was, in my opinion, an excellent example of really thinking down to the nitty-gritty, all different types of data and steps. We shared that with the cities and townships as well, so that they could model off of that, use that however they wanted. And it was held up statewide as an excellent example. So that's why it got included in this. So, and thanks to Jen for all of your work on that last year too. It was absolutely essential to our success. So,
Julie, looking back, is there anything that you maybe if now looking at that plan would change or would do differently?
Boy, it's a good question. Honestly, I don't think so. We really erred on the side of caution. In setting up our own absentee room, we of course ensured that we had social distancing throughout the voting booths, that we had social distancing for the folks coming in. When we social distanced people outside the Saturday before the election, we had quite the line outside of voters. So I really think we're just trying to be really, really careful. And it worked really well. One of the things that definitely helped was we received PPE, cleaning supplies, and masks, and all of that from the Secretary of State. They were able to take all of that and funnel it down based on voter counts. And I will tell you, I spent a great deal of time last year trying to figure out how to best then allocate that to the cities and townships, and pushing around hundreds of pounds of carts full of PPE so that we could allocate that to the different locations. But from the top down, it worked really well.
Deanne or Ann, do you have any comments when Julie shared the ops plans on whether that was beneficial for you as you tried to figure out how you were going to manage your polling locations?
I guess this year, it really was about preparation because we weren't sure what to expect. So having this gave me some assurance that as I went through your list, that I had either developed some reaction to something or a plan for whatever. Everyone here is too polite to say we dealt with a few crazies out in the precincts, and going back to just doing what's right, making sure that every voter has the opportunity to vote. Going back to your plan, it all helped us deal with all the unique situations that we dealt with this year. So it was reassuring to me to just read that and feel more confident in doing my job.
I would echo that as well for Prior Lake. And it was helpful to have this. I mean, I feel like we got this information, it's put together and days before, then you have to translate and train your judges on what to expect and how you're going to handle COVID, and that you might need more judges just to have someone to wipe everything down. So it's really nice that they took the time to go through and do this, because we're acting on our feet in such a short time. And it was helpful to have this guide to just be able to look at and react and pass that along.
All right, thank you very much for those comments. And really, I just wanted to ask one other question, just because there's also in the public dialogue just the idea of whether some of these alternatives are good alternatives, or whether we should look at a model where people vote on one day, like one day voting. And I'm just wondering if anybody has any costing information about what does it cost to provide these alternatives, and then along with that, do we have feedback? Do we have a mechanism for feedback from the community about the provision of those alternatives? So what does it cost and what do we know from voters? And that'll be our final question then, and we'll turn it over to the commissioners.
I can speak to the costing. I have definitely spent some time calculating out exactly what absentee in general costs us to administer. And of course, this doesn't include what it costs at the city and township level. COVID being such a unique year, I tried to be very careful about not overstating costs and saying this is what it always costs to administer absentee, because we had to do things so differently. It definitely costs more. It for sure did. And because our volume was so high. Absentee in 2020 for the general election cost just south of $250,000. In a regular, and I say regular, in a more normal, non-COVID sort of situation where we don't have 53% turnout for absentee, where we get our more normal, maybe closer to 20, those costs are a little closer to $75,000, $80,000 to administer absentee. What we can do differently, we can only control, of course, what we can control, the way that we staff. We do bring temporary staff in to help, and as Cindy said, we brought a lot of temporary staff in 2020 to help us manage that volume. So thankfully, there was a lot of federal funding that was able to assist us with that. But at this point, I can't, of course, offer you an opinion on 1 day versus 47 days. We just follow what the guidelines and the statutes tell us to do. But this is definitely giving your greater base of people the opportunity to vote.
Lisa, you had to respond quite a bit to comments on social media, Twitter, and all those other venues that you had alluded to early. Or when could you get a pulse from more of the tone, or was it really just small populations in your mind?
Yes, thank you, Cindy. I always caution people to try to gauge the temperature of the community by online conversations and chatter that go on. That having been said, everybody knows that passions were running high this particular year. So there were times where I did have to step in. Generally speaking, I try to take the least obtrusive path forward when it comes to moderating conversations, depending on the level of misinformation or outright non-factual information. I generally like to have them self-police. Then we go to a graduated scale of little nudges here and there, or statements of purpose, or at very few times I had to go in and actually delete comments with an explanation as to why that was being done. All in all, I would have to say that while there were more significant, there was a larger block of individuals that were expressing their concern, shall we say, about voter access initiatives that were prevalent in 2020. But like I said, with the confluence of COVID, I think that everybody's temperature was ratcheted up significantly over that period of time. And so it was kind of hard to tease out because they were happening at the same time. It was hard to tease out where the center of the ire was. But looking back, I think I would express that I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Let's put it that way. And that people overall seemed to be very receptive to accurate and timely information. And that was really due to a number of factors, but it was also primarily due to Julie Hansen and her staff being able to respond to me quickly with the information that I needed to get out there as fast as possible. So I don't know if that answered your question, but like I said, I always caution people, take online chatter seriously, but don't expect that it represents an adequate sample of what's out in the community.
All right, thank you. That was helpful, Lisa. With that, I want to thank the panel and ask Chairman Ulrich if you would like to ask any questions of the panel.
All right. Questions or comments from the board?
I would just, Mr. Chair, comment. I was, Cindy Geis gave me a tour last year of the voting room when it was down in that back room there. Yeah, they're very thorough. You know, they didn't, of course, let me in the room, but they were very thorough. They were double checking things going through those envelopes, and I thought it was a pretty well run operation. So thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for a great presentation. I mean, this is just foundational to the work we do. What government needs to do is provide safe, secure, and accurate elections. This is, you know, almost entirely on levy. It's a very important part of our role. Thanks especially to Ann and Deanne and David for being here today, because I think it's important to remember we don't do this in a vacuum. We don't do this alone as a county, but definitely with our cities and townships in the state. I especially liked the comments and what the part of the narrative about what's not working and really how those things are going to be addressed in the next year cycle. It's nice to be able to say, okay, this is what we're going to do a little bit better or different and already be down that path. One thing I thought about, and I think especially with maybe the increased angst or chatter of the most recent election, it might be good going forward as the county is developing their community outreach plan and trying to make sure folks are out and about and sharing information instead of just waiting for people to call us. I think a presentation on elections and what the county does with elections and how seriously we take it is a great idea for community groups, schools, whomever. And I know Julia plenty to do, but just something to put on the list of, I think it'd be a very interesting topic for a lot of people who live here. And then I just did have one question. So when we looked at the rejected ballots at 397, and Chris did a great job of explaining then how those voters, as long as there's appropriate time, were reached out to and provided information. I'm assuming those 397 rejected, that there's many of them actually were corrected or they were allowed to re-vote then, or is that a net? I guess was it 397 that didn't get a chance to vote, or 397 were rejected and then we had that outreach and many of them actually have their ballots counted?
That would have been 397 that those physical ballots were not accepted, but all of those people were given the opportunity and the option to re-vote. Whether earlier in the process they were just sent a ballot, a replacement ballot, and asked to re-vote, or if they were literally called on the phone, emailed, whatever information we had and said, you know, our timelines are tight, you need to go vote in person, however you choose to do that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all 397 did re-vote, but they were all given the opportunity to do so.
Great, that helps a lot. So it's probably likely way less than 397 people that didn't have that opportunity. Great, thank you, and thanks for a great presentation and the information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the team for the presentation. I apologize for being a little late, but I think I caught up on the gist of the presentation. If I can take off on Commissioner Reckmann-Brecky's comment on a core function of government. This is absolutely one of the foundational core functions of government. That it's on the levy, I think, is absolutely appropriate because we taxpayers should be paying for free and fair elections. And it's one of the most core things that we do. And to that end, on page 1, I'm going to make a comment here. On your objective, the objective is to identify and implement changes to service delivery leading to improved outcomes. And I guess you probably have a list of outcomes somewhere that I missed on the presentation, but I'm sure one of the outcomes that this commissioner would like to really encourage you to consider is the level of community trust and confidence in the whole process and how it works. As I've been traveling the county and I hear from my friends about election mischief and skullduggery and why this and why that, I have to assure them that when it comes to the county process, and I'll speak for the cities as well, because I was through a recount in a city election, and I got to see the internal workings of exactly how the whole balloting process worked, and how the recount worked, and how the ballot integrity is so sacred in the whole process that I have every confidence that once that ballot is in the possession of Cindy and her team, there's absolutely zero fraud or mischief or mistakes being made. And that, I think, is a very important outcome for us to stress. That our citizens can have every confidence that once that ballot is in possession of the Scott County elections team, it's gold. It's the gold standard. Ahead of that, though, I think is where a lot of the mischief and a lot of the angst is coming in this political season. And that had to do with what happens to the ballots before they get in our possession, and how are they distributed, who accounts for them, and things like that. So I'm going to ask you just two questions that might help define what's going on here. And I know a lot of it came from the state. Some of it came from the feds, and it was a very unusual season. And I hope you understand when folks are in angst about the election and concerned about the fairness of the outcome, a lot of it has to do with change, and it's not even change that was thoroughly debated and discussed by elected officials. A lot of it was just change that just happened in the chaos of the moment. And I hope we can all understand and give our citizens a little slack there on some of the angst that they felt, because things was like being made up on the fly. You talked about drop boxes. Now in Scott County, I know we had some drop boxes, but it seemed to me in my observation that Scott County's Dropbox process was about as tight and as controlled, and security was applied to that as about as well as it could be for having made it up in the last moment. I contrast that with what I hear from around the country from some of my other colleagues, that Dropboxes were sponsored by civic organizations or placed in neighborhoods where it made it easier for people just to come by and throw their ballot in a box. Well, good heavens, what could go wrong with that? So please assure us that in Scott County, there were only a few drop boxes, and the security and integrity of those drop boxes were protected. That's one. And then related to that, and I'll just make these my two comments. Ballot harvesting, where enthusiastic supporters of one campaign or candidate or another who volunteer to go out and collect ballots that have been mailed to people who requested them, or perhaps were asked to request them. The way we have our Dropbox system set up in Scott County, could ballot harvesting work? Could I show up with 300 ballots and drop them in a box here on an afternoon and say, there you go? So if you want to speak to those two things, I think that will help us with the confidence in that.
I will start if that's okay. And of course, Cindy, if you've got stuff to add, I welcome your comments. Thank you for your questions, Commissioner Beard. We were very careful this year. I was very careful in that I wanted people to know that we weren't running drop boxes. We were running drop sites. So we did not have drop boxes available for absentee voting. Did they literally go into a locked drop box? Absolutely they did. But they were not sitting on a wall. They were not outside mounted in any neighborhoods. They weren't outside at a police department. We had all of those conversations, except for the putting them in certain neighborhoods. We didn't have that conversation. But as far as putting them outside of a city hall or outside of a police station or outside our building or something like that, we did have all those conversations in trying to determine what was going to be the most secure and accurate way to get those ballots in our hands. I appreciate the fact that you believe that they're gold once we get them. I have the same belief. But running a manned drop site where it is a person that is there, they're not handing their ballot to a person. They are literally putting it in a drop box, but it is manned all of the time that we accept ballots. I feel very, very good about that. It is a very secure process. As far as ballot harvesting, no, there is no way in our county for someone to be able to bring 300 ballots or even 4 back. At each location, they have to, you can bring in up to 3 ballots. So you could bring your wife's ballot back and maybe your daughter's, but you couldn't bring your daughter's spouse. It's, you know, you can bring in 3 ballots that you then have to sign in. You can bring in your own ballot, just deposit your ballot and you're done. But the moment that you bring in someone else's ballot on their behalf, you have to complete a log, sign it in, review your ID to make sure that you're you. So we were very careful about that at all 8 of our drop sites, as well as if someone brought in a ballot to our absentee room or to us here at the government center, those do need to be signed in.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And Julie, for I wanted to get that on the record so people could hear that discussion. My other comments on provisional balloting and the lack of that in Minnesota, and perhaps the follow-up postcard trick for same-day walk-up registrations, that actually is a state problem. It's not way out of your control. So I'll save my comments for when I run into my favorite legislator someday. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, team, for a good job with your presentation.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you too. I'm thankful that we can have confidence in our elections. I'm thankful that for all the hard work your team did. This was a very difficult election season, a lot of extra work and a lot of moving parts, and they really did tremendous effort, and we're very appreciative of that. I do have one curiosity on my part. It did seem to me that different jurisdictions reported the counting of the votes to the public differently. Let me explain what I mean. I went to sleep feeling when a race said 100% of the votes are counted, well, that person, they won. 100% of the votes are counted, they won. Then I woke up in the morning and found out they lost. And I go, well, wait a minute, how did, 100% change? And obviously, I think what happened was it was 100% of the machine votes probably, and the absentee weren't done being counted yet. Is that the right perception? And I think we had a different procedure where we didn't report any results, so we had it all counted. But tell me what was happening there on this dynamic.
You're absolutely correct, Commissioner Ulrich. That's exactly what happened. We made the decision that we would count every single ballot that we had received on election day. So when you looked at the Secretary of State's website, it said 100% of precincts reported, which was true. And in our county, that's why we were counting late, because as you've heard today, and as you probably already know, the process for accepting an absentee ballot is not a quick, easy one. It is a very thorough, vetted process that has many steps to take. So we were counting late into the evening. But the specific race that you're referring to, the other part of that district's jurisdiction falls in another county. They chose to treat it differently. So 100% of precincts reporting was, like you said, 100% of precincts reporting and likely absentee up until a certain point. But then they chose to take a couple of days afterwards to do the rest of their absentee, and that's what changed the outcome of that race.
Yeah, it was just really surprising, so I mean, I think we all experienced surprises. And I wasn't really even commenting to races that were necessarily across county in our county and another county. I just noticed it in other areas where within our state where it said, well, it led me to believe that so-and-so won or lost, and it ended up not being the case.
Yeah. It doesn't smell right is what I would say. You would say there's 100% reporting, and all of a sudden you wake up, it's like, wait a minute, what happened at 3:45 a.m.? That's so I get it.
Yeah.
Commissioners, I want to comment a little bit. When we look at the amount of absentee and a county's decision on whether or not you're gonna call it a point in time, it is too bad that there isn't an indication that we can state that we still have more to count. And our system today, and David could allude to this as well, when absentee and a precinct has reported ballots and you load those up, it counts it as 100% reported. And knowing that we had so many absentee this year, it just took time. And even for us, we did not anticipate our drop boxes being used to the extent that they were on election day. Totally were taken blindsided by that, and knowing we're not going to do that again, because it they're there, and then it's like, just go to the polls and vote it by that time. It really, or we have to do something different in our process to get these votes counted, and maybe do a lot more driving throughout that day to get them in quicker. We weren't not anticipating that. So it is very difficult, but we do understand some of the problems. And I think because of the amount of absentee this year, it was an anomaly. Every county gets absentee every year, but for maybe their staffing wasn't quite up to par on that day, or they, maybe their ability just to get them processed, they wanted to report something. And I think all of you, when you were watching these races, you wanted to see our totals up there too, because we were getting tags saying, hey, Scott County, why aren't you reporting? And it was because we got probably 2 days worth of absentee back in just in that one election day. And now we had to go through and process, and we were running into issues. But we do understand, and like David from the Secretary of State's alluded to, we don't think we're going to see that type of turnout with absentee next year, but we don't know. We don't know. Some people really loved it, so that may be the next, or the way that they want to vote in the future. We just have to be prepared, and we pivot and we change, and we'll see where we go. But it is extremely difficult given the magnitude and maybe the ability to report partial versus total. So hopefully that's some consideration as we move forward as well.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's a way, I don't know, you'll have to research whether there's a way to let people know that these are not final results, and there's many more ballots to be counted. These are just partial. I don't know, but I get it. I understand, and I it's just a curiosity, and I think I had understood why, as I phrased my comment. But again, thanks again for all your hard work, and that we can have confidence in our elections here.
Mr. Chair, Cindy, just one more quick, and this is kind of a little off topic, but Credit River, they're probably the biggest precinct. Or is there going to be, are you guys talking to them about having another voting spot, or what's happening there? Do you know, or?
Julie, do you want to take that? Because I think you recently had a conversation with them, and I mean, they're a city. The one thing they have to do is they may have to look outside the boundaries of Credit River. But Julie, how did your conversation go with them when you did meet with them? As we get into this redistricting, commissioners, one of the things that the Secretary of State's information says that it really guides cities on trying to keep your polling locations, your precincts under 2,000 people, because it gets unmanageable and difficult, and there's angst by our voters. There's chaos inside the polling location, and so really, in order for us to really be able to manage things efficiently, and I mean us as in we're all a team here, is to help guide our cities and our townships. And when you have a polling location and if it exceeds that 2,000 threshold, it's going to get unruly. And how are you going to mitigate that? And Julie, I don't know what Credit River's comment was on some of the things they're considering.
The thing that we did definitely stress, and as Cindy said, we can't control that, we can only advise. But when I spoke with Credit River, they are going to start for the next election cycle, so next year, running 2 tabulators in the one space, which is also what Belle Plaine does. They're very similarly sized to Belle Plaine. We know that the Credit River City Hall is not a large space. So we've had some pretty upfront conversations about what that looks like for parking, for traffic management those days. On election day on 2020, I did receive a call from the sheriff's office about the fact that there were people parking on the side of a highway that people needed to cross to get to the town hall, and it's not safe. So we've had many conversations about that. Like Cindy said, they may need to look outside of the boundaries. There's not a lot of commercial, and not even commercial is the right word, but there's not a lot of development there. They don't have a lot of options. So they're going to start with adding a tabulator and looking very hard at their plan for how to manage the outcome of voters, traffic management, those kinds of things. That's the way it's going to start. They are also going to be taking on absentee for 2022, as are the rest of our small cities. So we're just going to work with them as closely as we can to ensure that they're successful and safe.
Julie, how many voters are there in Credit River? I mean, say 2,000 is the threshold. There's got to be 4,000 or so, right?
There are. Yep, just about 4,000 voters in Credit River. Yes.
Okay, I understand that Commissioner Beer has a question, and he's in the other room here. He's in
Reporting live from the Scott County penalty box. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Say just a couple quick questions. One, I wanted to talk about reporting, but the chair covered that pretty well. But I do want to say I also did get pinged that night. I was on the ballot, but other people were pinging me like, "Hey, where's Scott County? Where are the reports?" I'm like, "Hey, we're putting everything in its entirety." It's what, so when the numbers come out, they're going to be numbers you can go to sleep on, which I thought was awesome that we did it that way. But I also do kind of wonder that, as the chair mentioned, you go to bed thinking one thing and you wake up thinking another. That the topic is called transparent and accurate elections. So we've got a member from the state here. How do we best report that so that we do know what is being reported? Because whatever persuasion politically you are, I would think you would want to know that things are transparent, that things are accurate. So since we have I see the head nod from the state. So whatever you guys can do to help with that would be much appreciated. The other thing I just wanted to add on is, as I did come in, boy, does this seem like 10 years ago, this last election, or is it just me? Anyway, we had the fishbowl up in the boardroom, right? Because we had to do the handwritten count or hand counts. We had everything walled off so people could observe, and there were people up there observing. And I also wanted to go up there and just observe the process, and it was legit. Yes, people couldn't be breathing down your neck because they're trying to keep social distancing, but like I knew the people inside the fishbowl. I knew some of the people on the outside of the fishbowl, and again, once those ballots got in our hands, I have a super high degree of confidence that they were counted as they were delivered. Like, that's all I can attest to. So thank you for that part. But yeah, if we definitely can figure out a way to make sure we're breaking out that reporting, that's a really, really big deal if we really want to talk about transparent and accurate elections. Thank you very much. I'll be back in the penalty box if you need me.
all right. David, you were nodding. Do you have any comment on that? You go ahead. You do.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Beer. Yeah, that's something we learned too late. In fact, in one of the post-election audits that I participated in with one of your neighboring counties, that was a message delivered loud and clear. In the audit, one of their county board members sat in, and the county administrator, and I've never had that happen before, but that was their message, that the 100% of the precincts reporting really caused confusion in the state. And so we are looking at a way to better word that, or put a disclaimer to the point that it means all the precincts have reported, but it doesn't mean the total number of ballots necessarily have been reported, but we will clarify the wording on our reporting website.
Well, and I would always like to see that whatever bucket we call them, if it's absentee or whatever, that it's called that, that maybe that's its own precinct or whatever, because again, no matter which of your horse you're betting on or you want to win, it always goes both ways, well, generally. And I think people would want to know that. Thank
I
you.
think that's an excellent point.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks again for all your hard work and confidence in our elections. We really appreciate that.